Romantic poetry, who are considered the two manifestors of that period. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, with reference to some selected poems by Coleridge. And your colleague, Mustafa Athir, is going to make a presentation examining tackling Wordsworth and Coleridge as two important poets, and why are they referred to as the two manifestors of Romantic poetry?
Romanticism poetry. So before we start, define what is Romanticism poetry or Romantic poetry. What is Romantic poetry? Romantic poetry is a movement, artistic, intellectual, and literary in every Europe, American Latin, and United States. Okay? Yes. This is a movement, react for many reasons. For react of new classical poetry in the previous period. Some critics books divided Romantic poetry in three phases, or some critics divided in two phases: pre-romantic and romantic poetry. Okay?
And a childhood that is better than mine. Yeah, he makes a sort of contrast between his childhood and the childhood and what will happen for the childhood. Because what happens in the third part of the journey? What do we have in the third part? The journey starts in the past, then comes to the present. Then what happens?
We go to the future.
To the future. Goes to the future. What future? The future of whom?
The future of the child.
The future of the child. Excellent. He imagines that his child grows up and becomes, can walk. Now the child is only a cradled baby. He's just maybe some months aged. Okay? Now he imagines that his child becomes. هنا يشتغل عندنا imagination. Why? Because it is something that will happen, will take place. The first part of the journey, fancy. لكن أرجع أذكركم, let me remind you أنه this is the difference between Coleridge and William Wordsworth. He never distinguishes between fancy and imagination, and he thinks that both of them are synonymous.
Okay, so here some critics or historian critics consider the lyric ballad books as what? Is seminal works. Why? Because he recollect or revolution of the poetry, revolution of the subject of the poem, or rule of the poem in itself. So here it's what is revolution. Lyric ballad is revolution of the poetry, and so important movement in the lyric or the romantic poetry. Here composition poetry. Composition poetry is associated with whom? Associated with Samuel Johnson and Wordsworth, but who is the first introduced the conversation poetry. What is the conversation poetry? Conversation poetry is what? Is a personal. The poet itself expresses his feeling and his experience about in his life. So this called conversation poetry. It means express his event in the past. Okay.
Why is it called conversation poetry? A conversation in what sense? Between him and his babe, when he says, "Oh, babe," this is one point of conversation.
Yes.
Why is it a conversation? Because the babe is what?
Is that's created by the gods.
بس شوي ما هو غير عاقل. It's just a babe. It's just an infant, cannot understand language. Okay, so it is treated as non-human. Okay, but he imagines that his babe can understand language and the words that he says. Excellent. So as you see, this is a poem written in Langbirds and main motif, and it is categorized